now I love theaters and I love watching performances, but I never been able to be on the side of providing or making something. And the first thing I asked myself, the first question I asked myself was that now what I am providing, what I am going to offer. And its simplest answer was that, of course, it's experience that the audience take. But now, how can I know what the audience is experiencing? And how can I make sure that what I am trying to convey is understood or viewed from the audience? And then it became a really, really simple, fundamental, really simple theme for me. Somehow became chronicle, and then my series, everything is somehow titled with the word chronicle because it's kind of a journey and in a tracing of understanding or interpretation of things. And then this one is called Chronicle Perception because I wanted to somehow trace the subjectivity into somebody else's subjectivity and then manifest it, and then that could be understood by other people's subjectivity because nothing is the same. Even though we are talking about saying one thing, everything is understood through their own experiences and emotions and state of mind at that time. So this was a very, very simple attempt to how we express our subjective understanding of something, and then other person gets it and interprets it, and then somehow gives it back to me as a closing a loop. And earlier in the year, Jan introduced Emma, who is the Canadian dance-based performance artist, just as a contact. Then I somehow jumped onto this contact and then really started just through emails, not very many emails. And then we met for the first time in Jena. But we somehow knew something was clicking. And then I was rather not really worried, not very confident, but not really concerned whether things work or not. And then hopefully, I think it was a improvisation to the to the utmost, but it was very nice collaboration. Now I became a performer, which is again very nice. And this was the earlier actually at the jury that my idea was to take my subjectivity and show it through a simple object or image or generic architectural space or component or really narrative anecdotes, so that I throw something to Emma and then she would interpret it. And because Emma, her performance happens in urban space, reacting to architectural elements, and then she would perform her understanding and then gives back to me. Maybe you can talk a little bit about you.
So yeah, I am from Canada. I come from a background in dance and the performing arts, but I actually left dance when I was in my early 20s and studied the visual arts at Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design in Vancouver, where I did my bachelor's. And recently I just completed my Master's of Fine Arts at Concordia University. So my work is a blending of both worlds. I work a lot with site-specific performance. And in Jena, this was my plan, I have a project called Subtle Architectures, where I define a location with chalk to move within. And then I respond to the architecture, but also the movement of people passing by.
That's the top right view is actually her piece.
So these images here, yes, they're stills from a performance I actually did in Granby in Montreal, Quebec. And these are photographic stills of a performance, but then they've been altered. So I've gone back to the documentation I've carved into the photograph themselves and then ripped away the spaces that I worked within. So it's a multiplication of the context in which I worked. So when Takako contacted me, I was very much open to this idea of a collaboration, in some ways as an extension of my own work, but also as an opportunity to have a dialogue with someone who comes from a very different background than I do. I'm very interested in the interstitial, the spaces where all of these practices can meet and collide and then promote discovery or development of another way of looking at what we do as artists. So as she said, we really didn't have much contact before we both appeared in Jena. And we had one day to prepare for the performance that we did together. So the performance was fully improvised for both of us, and it was very much a dialogue in space. So we were very much open to this discussion that we were having in a public space, but also in response to Will's chalk drawings that he had in front of the theater Bauhaus, which in another kind of nice level of the work responded to my own work in space, working with chalk lines. So on multiple levels it extended my own practice and our relationship. So, yeah.
So, actually, I had lots of ideas, but somehow wasn't able to conclude in one way how to perform. So, and then we, like I presented already at Dessau, I encountered this very simple object, and this became transition or translating pieces between my work. And I took 10 of these with me to Jena to become a generator of spaces. Now this is really like a previous slide, an object and a generic architectural space or component, and so that was a very important piece, 10 of them. Yeah, and then when we first met up in Jena, I had with me like 10 of my obsessions, or some small collection of useless things on my shelves, to show the varieties of things that I am interested in. And on the right-hand bottom, that was anecdote that I wanted to use, but that was written in 1882, a diary of an American guy who first time traveled to Germany and kept a diary in a beautiful choreography. And I found it in Oslo open market. Somebody who bought it from New York, and I got it like a $5, and then brought it with me to London. And now it went to Germany, back to Germany, and it might go to Japan at some point. And it has beautiful travel documents, stamps and everything, but the contents is boring. Really boring. He doesn't say anything about the city.
But what is interesting about it, it is boring in the sense that it's a chronicle of every moment.
Yeah,
it's a description. I took a right, I went to the store. I took a left, I walked across the street. I saw someone with a hat, then I moved left. Then and it's this very, it's quite wonderful actually, because it's a whole book of
Nothing
this.
about the city. So we had this really getting to know each other session brief, and then we really quickly established that this will be the central piece. And then, we'll put it in text, tracing is it the right spelling? The journey of subjective experience of my subjective experience in the form of performance and documentation, and then journey of my subjective expressions, experience through spatial negotiations between Emma and me. And then first, I'll show you the video footage later, but started rather slowly and knowing what's going to happen, and then gradually, quickly evolved into a game somehow. First I was sort of creating spaces for her to respond, but eventually she started to chase me around And then there was good tension between us, I thought, that the lots of game, mind subjectivity going on. So that's when we are still sitting down to start before starting. And then this is when in the middle, in front of the inflatables, which was a beautiful, wonderful steps, and also on Will and Lyons game court. And really lucky for us that these grids of the tiles on the pavement was also another interesting grids for us to position these tiles. And this is some of the footage that I've done. At this point, my leg was actually injured, but I didn't feel the pain at all when I was
because of the
doing it.
ZCAM exhibition.
Because of what?
Of the ZCAM exhibition.
Yeah, so at this point I want to show where is it? Sorry about. Where is it?
And maybe just to elaborate a little bit as well, within my own work, which I won't go into too much detail now, I'm doing a presentation next Tuesday, the 26th, on my own work. So, but one of the things that I work with is enabling constraints, so ways that you can use a constraint to then proliferate other structures and other forms. And so what was nice about this...
no, this, sorry, this doesn't work on my computer, I discovered.
What was nice about this opportunity was here we were not only negotiating each other's practices, and Takako was laying out these kind of constraints for me to work within, but then as the movement started to proliferate and the space started to shift through my own movement, then it became this real kind of play back and forth. So, you know, she would give me a constraint, I would push it, and then maybe push the boundary a bit, which would then prompt her to push the constraint a little bit more, and so it really became this negotiation space.
What kind of constraints were
well, mostly what was taking place, Takako, and I have to tell this story because it's absolutely wonderful, and you might hate me for this, but at the beginning, Takako doesn't have any experience with performance, and this is partially why she approached me about doing this together. And for her greatest concern, she had these forms, so we quickly decided that the limitation of our game would be that she took these forms and she would place them in space